I stood there, 2 drinks in hand, one for her, one for me, and felt something inside me just snap. Not in anger, no. It was this cold, hard clarity that hit me like ice water. The kind that washes over you when you suddenly realize the person you were about to marry has been deeply, fundamentally ashamed of you this entire time. She just looked me dead in the eyes, in a room packed with her closest friends, and said, "Stop introducing me as your future wife. It makes me look like I settled for less." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. I didn't yell, didn't make a scene. I just quietly handed her the drink, turned, and walked away. But in my head, I was already unraveling everything. The venue, the photographer, every single thread of the future we were supposed to build. By the time I got home that night, I was a man on a mission. I pulled my name off every single event she'd signed us up for. I drafted an email to the venue coordinator. And I started writing a letter designed to systematically dismantle her carefully constructed image in front of everyone she cared about impressing. But to really understand that moment, to grasp the full weight of it, we need to go back. Way back, to a different time, a different me, and a different Emily. It started 2 years ago. I met Emily at Willow Creek Coffee downtown. She was this bright, energetic graphic designer for a boutique agency, doing branding for startups. And me? I was a welder. The kind of guy who comes home with metal shavings in his hair and grease under his nails. I thought I'd found someone who actually saw me, not just my job title. That first year? It was incredible. She'd show up at my apartment with takeout, we'd watch movies, she'd laugh at my dumb jokes. I honestly believed we were building something real. She even came to one of my job sites once, watched me work on a custom railing for a grand estate in the Berkshires. She said it was beautiful, that I was talented. I believed her. I proposed on our 2-year anniversary, right there at the same coffee shop. Got down on one knee, with a ring I'd saved 6 months to buy, and she said yes, crying happy tears. That's when things started to subtly shift. It was tiny at first, little comments I'd brush off because I didn't want to be paranoid. She'd start asking if I'd ever thought about going back to school, maybe getting a business degree, doing something more client-facing. Then, when her parents visited, she introduced me as someone who works in construction. Technically not wrong, but it felt like she was sanding down the edges of what I actually did. Her mom looked at me like I was something stuck to the bottom of her shoe, asking about my 5-year plan. And Emily just sat there, nodding, like it was a perfectly reasonable question to grill her daughter's fiancé with over dessert. I told myself it was nerves, wedding stress, intense family, her trying to keep the peace. Then came the engagement party her friends threw. That's when I saw the first real crack. Everyone was clinking champagne glasses, taking pictures, doing that whole performative happiness thing people do. I was talking to one of her coworkers, Kevin, who kept asking about my craft in a way that just dripped with condescension. But I played along, trying not to embarrass Emily. At some point, I mentioned Emily and I hoping to buy a house next year. Emily overheard. She pulled me aside, her face tight, her smile completely fake. She told me not to call her my fiancé in front of these people, said it sounded desperate. I laughed it off, thinking she was joking. She wasn't laughing back. The night everything fell apart, I was actually genuinely excited. It was her best friend Sarah's birthday, and I thought it would be fun. I wore the nice shirt she'd bought me, did my hair. I was ready to be the supportive partner. We were standing in a circle with her friends, all of them talking about their jobs, their expensive vacations, trying to one-up each other. I innocently mentioned how my future wife and I were thinking about Belize for our honeymoon. I was smiling, proud even, because I'd been researching resorts and saving up. That's when she said it. Loud enough for everyone to hear. "Stop introducing me as your future wife. It makes me look like I settled for less." The whole circle went quiet. Someone coughed. Her maid of honor just stared at the floor. I stood there like an idiot, holding both our drinks, feeling my face go hot. Emily tried to laugh it off, said she was just joking, but I saw her friends nodding slightly, like they'd been thinking the same thing, and she just had the audacity to say it out loud. I excused myself, said I needed air, and walked out to the parking lot. I sat in my truck for 20 minutes, just staring at the steering wheel. When she finally came out, she got in the passenger seat and tried to backtrack. Said I was being too sensitive and it was just a joke. I drove us home in complete silence. When we got back to the apartment, she went straight to bed like nothing had happened. Me? I stayed up all night at the kitchen table, laptop open. I went through every shared calendar event, every vendor email, every plan we'd made. I removed my name from her company's holiday party, from her sister's baby shower, from the charity gala her mom had roped us into. I drafted that email to the venue coordinator asking about cancellation policies. And I wrote the letter, the one that would go in the envelope, laying out exactly why I was done. Every word was surgical. By sunrise, my decision was made. When Emily woke up and asked if I wanted coffee, I just said sure with the kind of calm that comes right before a storm. She had no idea. No idea that in 72 hours, she'd be opening that envelope in front of all her friends at brunch, reading the words that would confirm she was right about one thing. She had settled. Just not in the way she thought. The next 72 hours were the strangest of my life. I was living with someone who had no clue I'd already ended our relationship in every way that mattered. Emily went about her normal routine, talking about centerpiece options, whether we should do a cocktail hour or go straight to dinner. I just nodded along, pretending I was still invested. She asked me to confirm our RSVPs for her friend Sarah's gallery opening next month. I told her I'd handle it. And I did. I sent Sarah a polite message explaining that Emily and I were no longer together and asking if she'd be willing to help me with something that required perfect timing. Sarah responded within an hour. Said she'd suspected things weren't right between us, and asked what I needed. I explained the plan. Emily had scheduled brunch with her core friend group at the Gilded Spoon, that upscale downtown place with the fancy mimosas and the 3-week wait list. Sarah was supposed to be there anyway, so I asked if she could arrive early, give the hostess an envelope with Emily's name on it, and make sure it got delivered to the table right after they ordered. Sarah didn't even hesitate. She said Emily had been getting more insufferable lately, and she was curious to see how this would play out. I spent that evening refining the letter. I didn't insult her, didn't call her names. I just laid out the facts in a way that would be humiliating precisely because it was true. I explained that I'd cancelled the venue, removed myself from all future plans, and that I was done being treated like a consolation prize by someone who'd spent the last 6 months making me feel like I wasn't good enough. I included a copy of the venue cancellation confirmation, printed it all on nice paper, put it in a cream-colored envelope, and sealed it with the kind of finality that felt like closing a coffin. The morning of the brunch, I woke up early, made myself breakfast, and watched Emily get ready like she was preparing for a fashion show. She tried on 3 different outfits, did her makeup twice, kept asking if she looked okay. I told her she looked great, because what else was I going to say? She left the apartment around 10:30, kissed me on the cheek like everything was normal, and told me she'd be back around 2. I gave it 20 minutes, then texted Sarah to confirm the envelope was in place. She sent back a thumbs up and told me she'd give me a full report later. I tried to distract myself by cleaning the apartment, but mostly I just sat on the couch, imagining how it would go down. Emily and her friends, ordering their overpriced brunch plates and bottomless mimosas. Gossiping about whoever wasn't there. Then the hostess would approach the table with the envelope. Emily would open it, probably expecting some cute surprise or a restaurant promo. And instead, she'd watch her entire future evaporate. In front of the same people she'd been performing for this whole time. Around 11:45, my phone started blowing up. First, a call from Emily, then 3 more in rapid succession. Then a string of texts that devolved from confusion to panic to outright rage in the span of 10 minutes. She wanted to know if this was a joke, if I was serious, if I'd actually cancelled everything. I didn't respond to any of it. The silence said more than any explanation ever could. Sarah texted me around noon with a play-by-play that was almost too perfect. Apparently, Emily had opened the envelope mid-sip of her mimosa, read the first few lines, and gone completely white. Her maid of honor asked if she was okay, and Emily just shook her head, kept reading, then stood up so fast she knocked her chair over. She tried to say something, started crying, grabbed her purse, and basically ran out of the restaurant while all her friends sat there in shocked silence, staring at each other. Sarah said one of them picked up the letter from where Emily had dropped it, read it out loud to the table, and the entire group just went quiet before someone finally said, "Well, I guess we should still eat since we already ordered." I would have paid money to see Emily's face in that moment. The exact second she realized I wasn't bluffing, that I'd actually pulled the plug on everything while she was out brunching with people she cared more about impressing than respecting me. By 1 p.m., she was at the apartment, banging on the door so hard I thought she might break it. I opened it, and she stormed in, mascara streaked down her face, waving the letter around like it was evidence of some heinous crime I'd committed. She started yelling about how I'd humiliated her, how could I do this in front of her friends, how I'd ruined everything. I just stood there, letting her get it all out, because I knew once she was done, I'd say the one thing that would break her completely. When she finally stopped to catch her breath, I looked at her and said exactly what I'd been rehearsing, "I just didn't want you to look like you settled for less." She froze. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. I watched her brain try to process the fact that I'd used her own words against her, thrown them back in her face with the same casual cruelty she'd used at that party. Then she switched tactics, went from crying to angry to manipulative in the span of 30 seconds. She told me I was overreacting, that I'd taken one comment out of context and blown up our entire relationship over nothing, that she'd been stressed and didn't mean it the way it sounded. I asked her if she remembered introducing me as just someone in construction to her parents. If she remembered telling me not to call her my fiancé at the engagement party. If she remembered any of the 100 other tiny cuts she'd made over the past year. She didn't have an answer for that. She just pivoted to attacking me instead. She said I was insecure, that I was punishing her for being honest, that maybe she had settled and this whole meltdown was just proving her right. That's when I saw the real Emily. Not the woman I proposed to, but the person who'd been hiding underneath the whole time. Someone who genuinely believed she was better than me, and was offended that I had the audacity to walk away first. I told her she had 1 week to get her stuff out of the apartment. That I'd already started the process with the landlord to remove her from the lease. And that if she tried to contact me again, I'd block her number. She laughed, said I couldn't just kick her out, that she'd make my life miserable, that everyone would know what a vindictive person I was. I pulled out my phone and showed her the screenshots of her texts to her friends, where she called me blue collar and joked about upgrading after the wedding. Messages her maid of honor, Sarah, had forwarded me weeks ago, when she'd started to feel guilty about keeping quiet. Emily's face went from angry to panic to utterly defeated in the time it took her to realize I had receipts for everything. She grabbed the letter off the counter, tore it in half, threw it at me, and walked out, slamming the door so hard a picture frame fell off the wall. I picked up the torn pieces of paper, taped them back together, and put them in a folder labeled evidence, because I had a feeling this wasn't over. That she was going to come back with a new strategy, and I wanted to be ready. The week I'd given Emily to collect her things turned into the longest 7 days of my life. Not because I regretted my decision, but because she refused to accept that it was actually happening. The calls started around 10 p.m. that first night, back to back until I turned my phone on silent and watched the screen light up over and over with her name. By morning, there were 37 missed calls and a voicemail inbox so full I couldn't receive new messages. I made the mistake of listening to a few of them. It was like watching someone cycle through every manipulation tactic in the book. The first messages were crying and apologizing, saying she'd made a horrible mistake and begging me to reconsider. Then they shifted to bargaining, promising she'd change, that she'd go to therapy, that she'd never make another comment about my job again. By message 15, she was angry, calling me vindictive and cruel, telling me I was going to regret throwing away what we had. The last few were just incoherent sobbing, mixed with threats about how I'd never find anyone better, and how she hoped I ended up alone. I deleted all of them and blocked her number. But apparently she'd anticipated that, because she started calling from different phones, her friends' numbers, even one I'm pretty sure was her mom's cell. My buddy Chris came over that second evening with beer and pizza, took one look at my phone blowing up on the counter, and just shook his head. He told me I'd dodged a nuke. He said he'd never liked Emily, that she'd always had this way of talking down to people she thought were beneath her, and that he'd been waiting for me to wake up and see it. We sat there eating pizza while my phone vibrated itself halfway across the counter. Chris told me about how Emily had once made a comment at a barbecue about how it was cute that I worked with my hands, like it was some kind of novelty hobby instead of a real career. I hadn't heard her say it, but apparently everyone else had, and they'd all just awkwardly changed the subject while I was inside grabbing more drinks. The next morning, I woke up to someone banging on my apartment door at 7 a.m. For a second, I thought maybe Emily had come back to actually get her stuff. Instead, it was her mom, dressed like she was heading to a country club board meeting, and the look on her face could have curdled milk. She pushed past me into the apartment and started lecturing me about responsibility and commitment, and how her daughter had lowered herself to be with someone like me. I just stood there in my pajama pants and old t-shirt, listening to this woman who'd never respected me for a single second tell me what a disappointment I was. When she finally paused for breath, I asked her to leave, and she refused. Said she wasn't going anywhere until I agreed to fix this mess I created. That's when I pulled up my phone, showed her the screenshots of Emily's texts about me being blue-collar and temporary, and watched her face go from righteous anger to uncomfortable silence. She tried to recover, said those messages were taken out of context, that Emily had just been venting to friends, but the damage was done. I told her she had 60 seconds to leave before I called building security, and she left muttering about how I'd never amount to anything. On day 5, around noon, I got a call from my landlord saying Emily had shown up at the leasing office trying to get a key to the apartment, claiming she still lived there and I'd illegally locked her out. I had to send him a copy of the lease modification paperwork showing her removal was in process, along with proof that I'd given her written notice to collect her belongings. He apologized for the inconvenience and mentioned she'd made quite a scene in the office, crying and insisting this was all a misunderstanding. Day 6 was when things escalated. I came home from work that evening to find my apartment had been broken into. And I knew immediately it was Emily, because nothing was actually stolen, just destroyed. The TV was still there, but the screen was shattered. My PlayStation was in pieces on the floor. There was milk poured all over the couch and the carpet. Picture frames were smashed. Clothes were scattered everywhere, some of them cut up with scissors. It was like a tornado of pure rage had torn through the place, and the only thing left untouched was the folder with evidence I'd hidden in my truck. I took photos of everything, called the police, and filed a report for property destruction. The officer who showed up took one look around and asked if I had a crazy ex-girlfriend. Said he'd seen this kind of thing 100 times. I showed him the timeline of events, the threatening voicemails I'd saved, the texts from unknown numbers, and he noted all of it in his report. He told me to document everything, keep records of all contact attempts, and consider getting a restraining order if she didn't stop. Emily had 7 days to get her stuff, and she'd spent it committing a felony instead. Over the next 2 weeks, things got progressively weirder. She started showing up at places she knew I'd be. The gym I went to, the coffee shop near my work, even the hardware store I stopped at on weekends. She'd just stand there staring at me, not saying anything, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her friends started reaching out, too. Some of them trying to play mediator, others straight up telling me I was wrong for how I'd handled things. Sarah was the only one who stayed neutral. Told me Emily had been spiraling since the brunch incident, posting cryptic stuff on social media about betrayal and heartbreak, fishing for sympathy from people who didn't know the full story. I took the engagement ring to a jeweler and asked about melting it down. The guy looked at me like I was insane until I explained the situation. Then he got this understanding look and said he could turn it into a keychain or a paperweight, or basically anything I wanted. I told him to make it into a small bar, something I could keep as a reminder that I'd literally melted down a bad decision and turned it into something useful. It took a week, but when I picked it up, holding this little silver rectangle that used to represent a future with someone who'd never valued me, it felt like closing a chapter. Everything expensive I'd bought her over the years, the designer purse, the fancy winter coat, the jewelry, I donated it all to the Hope Haven Women's Shelter downtown. I figured someone who actually needed those things should have them instead of letting Emily use them as props for her performance of a perfect life. I sent her a text from a new number, letting her know she had 24 hours to collect any remaining items from a storage unit I'd rented, and that after that, I'd be donating whatever was left. She responded immediately, said I had no right to touch her things, that she'd sue me, that I was going to pay for all of this. I didn't respond, just screenshot the message and added it to my growing folder of documentation. 3 weeks after the brunch incident, Chris dragged me out to a bar downtown, said I needed to stop hiding in my apartment and start living again. We were sitting there playing pool when Emily walked in, clearly already several drinks deep, and made a beeline for us. She climbed up onto a bar stool in the middle of the room and started loudly telling everyone about how she'd been betrayed by someone she'd given everything to, how she'd wasted years of her life on someone who wasn't worth it. People were staring, some of them recording on their phones, and I just stood there with my pool cue, wondering how we'd gotten to this point. Chris tried to get the bartender's attention, but Emily wasn't done. She started pointing at me, telling the whole bar about how I'd humiliated her, ruined her life, destroyed her reputation. Someone near the back yelled at her to get down, and she ignored them, kept going until she was practically screaming. That's when I walked over, looked up at her, and said the only thing that felt appropriate in that moment, "You're right. I hope you find someone better than me, because the whole point is for me to never meet someone like you ever again." The bar went completely silent for about 3 seconds. Then someone started laughing, then someone else, and suddenly the whole place was losing it. Emily's face went from dramatic grief to pure humiliation, and she tried to climb down from the bar stool but stumbled and nearly fell before the bouncer caught her arm. He escorted her out while she was still yelling something about me being a terrible person, and the bartender gave Chris and me a round on the house for the entertainment. 2 months later, I got a check in the mail from Small Claims Court, reimbursement for the property damage Emily had caused when she trashed my apartment. I used it to buy a new PlayStation, a better TV than the one she destroyed, and put the rest in savings. Life went back to normal, slowly. Work kept me busy. I started going to the gym more, picked up some freelance welding projects on the side. Emily's social media went quiet eventually, and Sarah told me she'd moved to a different part of town and was telling people we'd had a mutual breakup, which was such a pathetic rewrite of history that I didn't even bother correcting it. Sometimes I think about that moment at the party when she said I made her look like she'd settled. And I realized she'd done me the biggest favor of my life by showing me exactly who she was before I made the mistake of marrying her. Being alone turned out to be so much better than being with someone who measured my worth by job titles and social status. Chris was right. I hadn't just dodged a bullet. I'd dodged a whole firing squad. And every day I woke up in my quiet apartment without someone making me feel inadequate was a reminder that I'd made the right choice. The only choice that made sense once I'd finally seen the truth. What do you think about this story?